Welcome to another IKS Meetup, where I dive deep into all things sugar related to physical and mental health with IKIC Sugar students and experts in the field of health and wellness, sharing stories of transformation and empowerment along with lessons. These intimate, deep, and often intense conversations are designed to educate, inspire, and empower you to discover your healthiest self. Today is a very special IKS Meetup. It is one of our special guest episodes. And today I have the privilege of sitting down with Dr. William Davis, MD, cardiologist and #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Wheat Belly books, as well as Undoctored, and his most recent book, Super Gut. I am looking forward to having an in-depth conversation about the deep and I believe totally overlooked connection between our gut microbiome and modern health ailments and complaints. So welcome, Dr. Davis. It is such an honor to have you join me here today. Thank you for taking time out.
Well, thank you, Joyce. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. So we're going to jump in here. I mean, as an expert, a leader, a pioneer in the area of gluten-free living and gut health, I mean, you are one of those rare doctors who has rejected the conventional ways, of delivering health through drugs and procedures. And instead, you've sought out ways to restore your patient's health naturally, logically. I mean, it makes sense when I hear about it, read about it, and surprisingly, inexpensively. And this is not common. I know you know this. That's why you wrote the book Undoctored. It's not, common for Western trained physicians to really step outside the box like you have. And for that, I first want to commend you. Anytime I meet a doctor like you, it's like, wow, amazing. And I also want to just personally thank you, take a moment and thank you because you don't know it, but you're actually currently playing a pivotal role in my own personal health right now and my journey. So I want to thank you for that. I'll explain a little bit more about that as we dive deeper into the gut microbiome. But before we dive into the topic of your book, Super Gut, which I recommend all of my ladies, my audience, anyone watching this, listening to get. It's fantastic. And before we get into these discoveries, along with solutions regarding our gut microbiome, can you briefly just share with our listeners how your journey all started down this path with, the first series of the Wheat Belly books, which I also have and highly recommend for everyone here. Maybe share what your pivotal moment was for you as you're practicing, I'm assuming, cardiology, Western, a regular practice, Western medicine, and then how you started to kind of go against the grain, no pun intended. So let us know about that.
Joyce, it was a series of blunders
Okay.
and bad things that happened, including I was practicing what's called interventional cardiology in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is back almost about 30 years ago.
Okay.
And so I was opening people's arteries, aborting heart attacks, putting in stents, all that kind of stuff. And then my mom went through a 2-vessel coronary angioplasty in New Jersey, where I grew up, and then died suddenly in bed about 4 months later. Well, Joyce, here my mom dies of a disease I thought I knew how to manage in a cath lab, in a hospital procedure lab. And so I asked myself back then, well, what could I have done a year, 2 years, 5 years ahead of time to have said, hey, Mom, something bad's going to happen. We need to take action today. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you ask the conventional thinking doctor, he says, check the cholesterol, which is an abominably stupid answer because cholesterol tells you nothing about your future heart disease risk. So if your total cholesterol, say, was 240, are you going to have a heart attack tomorrow, next Tuesday, next month, next year? Never? You can't tell. Yet that is the sole focus of most of my colleagues: cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and statin drugs and related things to reduce cholesterol. The real tragedy, Joyce, is that it took everybody's attention away from the real causes of heart disease. Well, so in part of that effort to try to help people like my mom, I set up a place in Milwaukee called Milwaukee Heart Scan, taking advantage of a technology that was new 30 years ago. It's
Okay.
still around. It's still the best way to identify your risk for heart disease. It's a quick scan of your heart, and we give you a score, a calcium score, because calcium is an indicator of atherosclerotic plaque. Well, normal is 0. So I'm having people like you and me and your listeners. These are people going to work, going to school, riding their bikes, going to class, feeling fine. These are not people in the emergency room with chest pain or having a heart attack or congestive heart. These are people like you and me.
Okay.
Well, when you look for hidden heart disease, Joyce, you'll find it everywhere. So let's say a woman comes in and says, "Hey, I'm 58. My mom died of a heart attack at 62.
Mm.
Is that in my future?" We do a scan. Her score, let's just say, is 400, which is very high. And that means her likelihood of dying or having a heart attack or needing a procedure like a stent or bypass surgery is quite high, on the order of about 10 to 15% per year. So we know over 5, 6, 7 years, it's guaranteed virtually that she's going to have something bad unless you take steps. Well, back then, Joyce, 30 years ago, the answer was baby aspirin, low fat, low cholesterol diet, high dose cholesterol drug like Lipitor 40 milligrams, and an exercise program. So we also help publish these data. If you did nothing, that score of 400 will be 500 what's 500 a year later, 620, and every step you're closer to dying or having other catastrophe. What if you go on baby aspirin, high dose Lipitor, low fat diet, exercise? How fast does it increase? 25% per year. It does nothing. Well, what do I do at this street level where people are freaking out? Because of course, my colleagues said, well, we'll do the real test, the heart catheterization, see if you need a preventive stent or bypass. That is immoral. It's unethical, Joyce. It's malpractice, and it's done every day. Every day, thousands of times, because it's hard to resist the thousands of dollars in procedural fees. Yes, all about money. But it's because the science is clear. If I put a stent in somebody who's going to work, riding their bike, and no symptoms, they obtain no long-term benefit, 0 benefit, but the doctor makes a lot of money. So what do you do then to put a stop to these scores?
Yeah.
Well, it took some years to figure out. For instance, it led to adding vitamin D. Hugely effective. The only time I saw scores go down, Joyce, drop precipitously. But I also rejected this idea that cholesterol is a reliable predictor of heart disease. It is not. It should have been abandoned decades ago, but it makes too much money for the pharmaceutical industry. There is a better test. There's a bunch of other things you can do, but one of the better tests is called lipoprotein testing, fat-carrying proteins, quantifying and characterizing the particles in your blood that cause heart disease. I've been doing it for 30 years. Well, when you do that, you start to realize, and the science is very solid here, it's not my speculation, that the number one driver of cardiovascular risk is not LDL cholesterol. That is, using cholesterol to guesstimate how many LDL particles you have. We can actually measure the particles, but specifically the really bad one is the small LDL particle. So these people would have terrible heart scan scores, or somebody survived sudden cardiac death or heart attack. We do their lipoprotein testing, and they'd have something like this: 2,000 nanomoles per liter, particle count per volume, small LDL particles. Well, we knew from good science 30 years ago, Joyce, the only things that cause small LDLs, vicious little cause for heart disease. There's a variety of reasons for that. What caused it? Well, not pork fat, not bacon, not butter, not cholesterol, wheat, grains, and sugar. That is well sorted out. And so I asked people, all right, let's get all the wheat, grains, and sugar out of your diet. Some people at first, I said, what? We did it. Small LDL drops to 0.
Wow.
Or some other it's not like 30% better. It plummets typically to 0. But they would say this also. Why did I lose 47 pounds? Why did my diabetes go away? Why did my high blood pressure drop so I had to stop 3 blood pressure medicines? Why am I no longer depressed? Why are my migraine headaches so much better? Why did my leg edema go away? Why did my rosacea get better?
You were seeing all these results, just from that. And is that where you really then connected the dots to seeing that when you discovered, the small particles and you changed and knew that fat wasn't the culprit, if I'm understanding you correctly, that was a lie about 50 years ago when that really started and shifted, and that you're going against the grain in that way, that's saying it's not fat. You had your patients, that you didn't just hypothesize this and make this up. You started seeing results, like people's health was changing, their heart health, if I'm hearing you correctly, just from taking out the wheats, the grains, and the sugar. Did I get that right? I mean, you're the doctor. I'm not.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Exactly right.
I mean,
Now,
it's
now
insane.
think about this, Joyce. So doing the opposite of what most doctors, dietitians, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, virtually everybody agrees. You must cut your fat and cholesterol, and you must eat more healthy whole grains, and then other silly messages like everything in moderation.
Right.
Um, by the way, that message comes from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, supported by Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and
Of course.
Nabisco, and General Mills. So we had this corrupt message that actually causes heart disease, adds to risk for diabetes, amplifies your risk for breast cancer and dementia. In other words, so doing the opposite, though it took this series of blunders for me
Right.
to figure this out.
Right.
But I started asking the question, well, why did they get it so wrong? Is there something different about modern wheat, for instance, compared to traditional wheat? And of course, it is. It's a creation of modern wheat is a creation of genetics research. It's a high yield semi dwarf strain that stands 18 inches tall, is very thick, has very large seeds, large seed head. It was created, Joyce, of course, not to screw with us. It was created for higher yield per acre for farmers to help feed the hungry of the world. So
Right.
it came from noble purposes. But one of the things that Big Food, I think, recognized is that the changes in the appearance of this plant were accompanied by dramatic biochemical changes
Hmm.
and thereby the effects on humans. And one of the changes was an amplification of the what's called gliadin-derived opioid peptides. So the
Okay.
gliadin protein, people say gluten, but it's the gliadin protein in
Okay.
wheat-related grains. Upon digestion, humans are incapable of digesting many of the proteins in wheat and grains. We just don't have the enzymes for it because
Right.
those are seeds of grasses, and humans are not ruminants. We're not goats. We're not horses. We don't have the enzymes or the microbes to break those things down. So we break down the gliadin protein into 4 or 5 amino acid long fragments or peptides.
Okay.
Unlike, say, eating an egg or a piece of beef, we break it down to single amino acids. But the gliadin protein can be digested down to these fragments, and these fragments act as opioids on the brain and stimulate appetite.
Hmm.
So wheat, anything with wheat, flour, and related grains, like corn with zein
Okay.
protein, or rye with the secalin protein, or barley with the hordein protein, these are all potent appetite stimulants.
So
And I
the
believe,
if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm sorry to interrupt, that the manipulation of these grains from the big food is really, it's not the food itself, it's what they did to it genetically. Hence why I think you use the term Frankenbelly, right? Or like the Franken grains. I mean, it really is Frankenstein medicine. That it's not natural wheat. I mean, it's been manipulated and genetically altered. And if you're saying correctly in layman's terms, it is making us addicted. It reacts differently to us. Very similar, I think. I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Robert Lusting's work and his recent book, Metabolical. I mean, amazing also. And, I've heard him say it's not necessarily the sugar and the food, it's what has been done to the sugar and the food. It's not the same sugar that our grandmother, baked 50, 100 years ago when they made a cake. I mean, it's the cakes and pastries are different today. The food is different today. I don't even call it food. It's food-like products, right? It's not a food. So I apologize for interrupting, but I want to make sure that everyone is following along because it's amazing what you're sharing with us.
now we have to be careful because people say, oh, if the problem is modern high yield semi dwarf wheat created in a genetics laboratory, maybe traditional wheat is better. Well,
Okay.
it is less harmful, but here's a question. What happened to the first humans 12,000 years ago So for the preceding 3 million years of our species' time on this planet, we hunted, we gathered, we dug in the dirt for roots and tubers, we killed animals, we fished, we gathered shellfish, gathered bird eggs. That's how we ate. And then 12,000 years ago, just a second ago in time, in evolutionary time, we added the seeds of grasses. And the first seed of grass we added was einkorn wheat, a 14 chromosome plant. I point that out because modern wheat is a 42 chromosome. So Joyce has 46 chromosomes. I have 46 chromosomes. Your listeners all have 46 chromosomes. If you're an orangutan, you have 48. But if you're a human, you have 46. Well, modern wheat, 42. Einkorn, traditional wild wheat, 14. Very different.
What a difference. Yeah. Very, very different. Wow. So you saw the results that really then just continued on your journey when you connected those dots way back. About how long ago are you saying, like maybe 30, 25 years ago, when you had this aha and really saw the difference going on? Is that correct, about that time?
This goes back at least 15 to 25 years, Joyce,
Okay.
in bits and pieces. Because when I first recognized, when I saw people come back, they came in obese, hypertensive, 2,000 nanomoles, small LDL, high coronary calcium score, survived a heart attack, pre-diabetic, all that stuff. They come back slender, youthful, vigorous, with triglycerides of 45, fasting glucose of 84, hemoglobin A1Cs of 4.8%, blood pressures of 112 over 74, flat tummies. When I saw lives transformed and being freed of numerous diseases,
Right.
now wait a minute. How can this possibly be?
Right. Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And just that you were willing to look, to not accept the norm. And again, go outside the box there. So let's dive into then super gut. Okay. We talk a little bit about wheat belly here, which, by the way, side note with the book here, very creative. I mean, you made, first of all, some very complex subject matter, scientific subject matter, I feel entertaining and easy to understand. I by no means have a medical degree or background. So I needed it to be, simple. And I think that's hard for a lot of doctors to do, to talk to us folk. So thank you. And I mean, I have to read just so some of our listeners can hear. I mean, when I say creative, you're probably like, what do you mean creative? Well, maybe but like chapters, saying like SIBO, Frankenbelly, or the fecalization of America. I love this one, mind your mucus, or fungal jungle, gut wrenching, or I love this one, bowel power. I mean, when I hear these, I think it could be a cartoon series for kids with these titles. It's fantastic. It really is.
Oh,
so
thank you, Joyce.
I commend you on that. So with the first book, Wheat Belly, which by the way has sold over 1 million copies for all listening here, you share in Super Gut, and we were just talking about thousands of people who were having, you were writing there at the beginning of the book, tremendous success, with going off of and cutting the grains out of their diets. They were experiencing effortless, weight loss, as you said, reversing many diseases, going off medications. And then I quote, let me find this quote here. In the book, you wrote there, quote, this was from somebody, a patient of yours or someone going through the Wheat Belly challenge there. I lost 47 pounds without even trying, and I'm no longer hungry all the time. I'm no longer pre-diabetic, as you mentioned. I'm off 2 blood pressure pills. My rheumatoid arthritis is about 70% better, but still I have some flare-ups, end quote. In other words, you mentioned removing those Franken grains from the diet and adding in a handful of some nutritional supplements. You recommended, and said reverse so many of the health issues, and the health phenomena of insulin resistance. That's huge. But, it didn't fully address all of people's health issues, which was leading you towards this. And this is where, I wanted to say, I have seen the same thing with women in my program. They have had tremendous results from cutting out ultra processed foods and that added sugar, very similar to what you saw with your community, that after they removed the frankengrains, and yet they were still, have plateaued. Some of my women have plateaued, some still have health issues, including myself, and if I'm being truly honest and vulnerable with my audience now, I haven't known why. Actually, I didn't even connect the dots. And I think I'm a very intelligent person. I love science, I love health. And that's how you really have to bring in awareness, and you have to do the research to understand this, because I wasn't connecting even my symptoms until I discovered you and relating all to my gut microbiome. So I just have to say, first off, thank you. Thank you for doing this important work, this research, for writing all of these books, and although I've been sugar-free for 8 years, I've reduced also my A1C. I've lost 67 pounds. I have never, in these 8 years had a sinus or yeast infection again. Yay! I've reversed my fatty liver. I've gotten off of that roller coaster that I was on, of those highs and lows with my manic mood swings that I believe was due all to, that sugar, those glucose spikes, and then the drops and feeling lethargic. And then I'd eat more sugar to get energy. That roller coaster I'm off of, but I still have struggled with health issues, and my biggest one, if I could share with you, has been flare-ups, bloating, intense abdominal pain, a lot reduced from sugar, I'm not going to lie, but I still have had it, and that's from eating something as simple as an apple or sugar snap peas. And I'm like, what, and then I beat myself up. What am I doing wrong? I'm a healthy person. I'm helping thousands of women. What, am I missing something here? I also have had for last several years, very intense body aches that I have attributed to menopause. I'm 54 now. I've been in menopause now for this August actually is 5 years. And when I first started feeling these body aches, even my hormone specialist was like, it's your hormones, you're feeling that because of, perimenopause, menopause. So what do? We put me on a bunch of hormones. I kind of felt like maybe it worked, but in all reality, if I'm being honest, no, I still had them. And I never labeled it as fibromyalgia, but really, after really diving deep and hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, it is fibromyalgia. I've also had, it's canny, like how much when you were, because I also listened to the audiobook and read, like hearing you telling me this, walking through this, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me, that's me, that's me. On again, off again, skin rashes. Go to my dermatologist, a lot on like my stomach or like on my back. And they're like, oh, that's dermatitis and it's due to you. I can see it. It's because, do you use a loofah in a hot shower? Yes. Well, it's like you're scrubbing too hard because, I'm like really like a clean freak. And I love, like taking off my dry skin. And they're like, yeah, it's that. And, if you scrub too hard with the hot water, you can actually get like a fungal irritation. They want to put me on all of these ointments and sometimes even oral things. I'm like, no, I'll just stop that. And it would go away a little bit. It comes back. But I never really noticed also. So there was that. And also bouts of depression. I don't have those mood swings, but I'm not going to lie. And I'm a very positive, upbeat, motivated person. And yet I struggle with that emotionally. And here's another one. It's like, hey, I got issues. Let me tell you. Can we talk here for a second, doctor? Right, because I want women to hear, so maybe they can connect the dots too. I never also labeled myself as having restless leg syndrome, but now I'd say, yes, I do. And it wakes me up at night. And I attributed it, I would say I cramp, because a lot of times it will go into like a Charlie horse or a cramp, like from that, like a lot of movement. And I'd say, oh, it's an electrolyte imbalance. And I have been tested and I do have some lower potassium, but then it doesn't always cramp and it's just like restless legs. So I think I've confused or meshed the two, and they're two separate, low potassium versus restless leg. So I never, ever, ever connected these dots until Super Gut. And I have to say, as methodical as I am, I didn't even notice that they were all kind of happening at the same time. So it's just connected. So what I really discovered from your book, and following the protocol and the map that you lay out using, yes, I got the breathing device. So like, I know, like, this is real, this is not in my head. Like, wow, when I have that flare up and I ate those sugar snap peas, I'm off the charts with a 10, and it's like, whoa. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's SIBO, and that's the culprit. So can you explain to our listeners what you discovered about SIBO, maybe let them know what it is, also SIFO? I wouldn't be surprised if I perhaps have that. And explain what SIBO is, because again, I didn't connect the dots, and I thought it was very rare. And I'm finding out, from you and your community, like, it's not rare. It's not rare. So please share.
Joyce, exactly right. I thought it was rare also. So SIBO, S-I-B-O, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And all that means is because of our overexposure to antibiotics and other factors like glyphosate, the herbicide Roundup, that's an antibiotic also, stomach acid blocking drugs, preservatives in food that are antimicrobial, emulsifying agents like polysorbate 80 and carrageenan in your ice cream and salad dressing. A long list of factors have messed up our microbiomes. Among the effects is we've lost hundreds of beneficial species. Well, those beneficial species did good things for us, including suppressing the proliferation of fecal microbes. And these fecal microbes overproliferate in the colon, but then, remarkably, Joyce, they ascend into the small intestine, 24 feet of small intestine. Well, the small intestine is by design very permeable. That's where you absorb vitamins and minerals and amino acids and other things. But when you have trillions of fecal microbes in the small intestine where they're not supposed to be, they live and die. They only survive for a few hours at a time. When they die, they release some of their toxic compounds. One of them is called endotoxin. And that endotoxin gets through that very permeable small intestine, what some people call gut leak.
Okay,
And
leaky gut. Okay,
Mhm.
I've heard that term, yeah.
And when endotoxin floods your bloodstream, that's called endotoxemia. So you may not be aware of this, or you might be aware of it as Resslig syndrome, or as food cravings, or as abdominal fat, expansion of abdominal fat, or depression, or hatred, Joyce, hatred,
Mm,
or anger, or anxiety, or
mm.
rosacea, or psoriasis, or fibromyalgia. These are all reflections of excess endotoxin, also food intolerances. So these are all reflective of SIBO and endotoxemia. So, well, how do you get rid of this? Uh,
Yes.
well, if you went to your doctor, John Q. Primary Care or gastroenterologist, one, they usually just make fun of you.
Hmm.
They say, Joyce, you've been talking to Dr. Google again, haven't you?
Totally.
Or,
That happened to me.
yeah, or it's in your head. There's nothing wrong with you. We didn't see anything in your colonoscopy. And you don't see it, of course. If they're even a little bit informed, they'll say, okay, Joyce, here's a prescription for Xifaxan. It's an antibiotic. Now, wait a minute. Antibiotics got us here.
Yeah.
Is an antibiotic another one the solution? So I refuse to do that. There are times when that may be appropriate.
Right.
But here's a question I ask. If you have SIBO, 30 feet, including 24 feet of small intestine, filled with fecal micro, that's why I call it the fecalization of America.
I love it. It's fantastic.
So if you took a commercial probiotic off the shelf, will it go away?
Right.
No. You might have some reduced bloating or diarrhea, but you still have the 30 feet of fecal microbes. So I ask these questions. Joyce, what if we chose microbes that are known to colonize the small intestine, where SIBO occurs? And
Mhm.
what if we choose species and strains that produce what are called bacteriocins? These are natural antibiotics effective against fecal microbes.
Okay.
So I chose three, a strain of Lactobacillus reuteri, a
Okay.
strain of Lactobacillus gasseri. Those two colonize the small intestine, produce bacteriocins. And a strain of Bacillus coagulans, likewise, small intestine, bacteriocin producer. We co-ferment them into something that looks and smells like yogurt. It's not yogurt. It's a way of doing prolonged fermentation to get really high counts of microbes. We get about 300 billion
Wow.
half cup serving. And so far, of 50 people, more or less, who've done this, 90% have normalized their breath hydrogen gas on that device you're talking about,
Yeah, yeah.
had some persistent symptom go away. So, as you point out, if somebody says, "Hey, I did your program, and I have rheumatoid arthritis or fibromyalgia or whatever," it's 80% better. I got rid of the wheat, addressed some nutrient deficiencies. I feel so much better. I'm off the biologic agent that was costing me $4,000 a month in copays. I'm
Mm.
off the prednisone, but I have taken naproxen now and then for minor flare-ups. Which percent? We get rid of the SIBO, it goes away once and for all. Or somebody says this, "Hey, I started out as a type 2 diabetic, hemoglobin A1C of 11.9% or some terrible number on their way to kidney failure and amputations. I did the program. It's down to 6.3%. Much better. Still lousy
Right,
because we
right.
want it below 5. They do this. They get rid of the SIBO and endotoxemia. Now it's 4.8. So it
Yeah.
was the missing piece, Joyce, and people say things like, "My fibromyalgia is gone. I'm no longer depressed. I don't have anxiety. I like people better."
Right.
And all kinds of wonderful effects. So not only does it give you hopes of controlling SIBO, and
Right.
by the way, we will conduct a formal clinical trial, but you know what, Joyce? If the solution is something that looks and smells like yogurt that you make in your kitchen, how confident do you really have to be? And those microbes I listed are microbes you should have had all along anyway, that you
Right.
got from your mom at birth or through breastfeeding, but you lost, maybe your mom lost too, from antibiotics, multiple course of antibiotics and other factors. So all we're really doing is restoring microbes you should have had all along, but these microbes in particular have the capacity to colonize the small intestine, produce bacteriocins. And now we're seeing all those conditions recede, including food intolerances.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait because I've noticed that too through the years. So, I mean, essentially, that's another symptom, food intolerances, which I never had anything to point to what causes that. I've always known though it comes and goes, and that's what I've told my ladies. Just because maybe you can't eat something healthy right now, like broccoli or sugar snap peas or an apple, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to in the future. But maybe that's because we weren't having like a massive flare up of SIBO. That's why, like during the times when I could go back to eating broccoli, I felt great. Then all of a sudden something starts to happen and the flare up, comes back. And really the flare up is like you're saying, I guess, just more overgrowth of the bad bacteria that are ascending up into our small intestines. Is that correct? Where they shouldn't be. And if I'm not mistaken, reading your book, they weren't there, I don't know how many years ago, but they're not supposed to be there. And they're there, which is why this breath tester, like, if they weren't there, it wouldn't pick up on it. Like it couldn't do a reading down where they're supposed to be or stay. So, it's so fascinating. We're talking about modern culture, and you mentioned the book, you mentioned just a little bit a while ago also about like what is causing this destruction. And, I could relate to so much. I mean, I was raised on antibiotics. That's what we did. When we had the flu or strep, I can't tell you every season how many times I had strep throat growing up, and it's like, oh, here's around. And then in my 20s, I had, sinus infections and yeast infections. And I was like, oh, you got a sinus infection. Here you go. Have an antibiotic, have a Z-Pack. Here, have another Z-Pack. That didn't work. Have another Z-Pack. It's like, it was just like, I mean, I've probably been on, no lie, like close to 40 different rounds of antibiotics. It's insane. So no wonder why. I mean, I remember growing up, my mom had a garden. She thought she was doing good, but what is she putting on there? Roundup, my grandpa, like they're spraying, like there's white powder on our tomatoes that I'm eating. Not to mention all of the health, if I'm not mistaken, you're also saying lots of different things like from our environment, just the toxins. Maybe you could explain a little bit more some of the environmental toxins. Do they have an effect on our gut microbiome also, like water bottles or lotions and potions, any of that? Or are we okay with that?
There's probably a long list, many hundreds of items
Yeah.
long, that have an impact. Unfortunately, there's no money to make and a lot of money to be lost. And so that science is very slow and gradual, but it is clear
Yeah.
that there are many chlorinated drinking water, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, polysorbate 80, carboxymethylcellulose,
Yeah.
sucralose, aspartame, on and
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So that you just hit a really big one, which will be important for my ladies to make sure they hear, because a lot of them are, my audience tends to be more like 55, 60, 70. They're dealing with arthritis. They're dealing with a lot of inflammation. A lot of them are on the anti-inflammatories. I was never a big proponent. I say, oh, I'm anti-drug. And, I haven't been on any drugs really in 8 years plus, but I've been noticing my increase in Advil, and ibuprofen in the last several years as I've dealt with my body aches as they've progressed. And so I didn't have that, but then, I start that. I'm like, oh, it does kind of feel a little bit better. But it's like it's putting fuel on the fire. And so in the last month, following your protocol, I'm off of those. And it's crazy. It's like I've subsided. Just that alone has, I think, been helping, the SIBO is not putting that fuel on that fire. And I did not know that anti-inflammatories. I mean, I knew it was bad. You shouldn't take that for high blood pressure, that it's bad for our liver, for our kidneys, but I had no idea, like Tylenol for the liver, that it was bad for our gut microbiome. So again, like I like to say I'm smart and intelligent, but I didn't know, we all need to read this book to get this in very, very important information. And you were talking about like also just the start of birth, C-sections, and that so we lost so many microbes if people were delivered, via C-section versus not getting that when they were first born. So it's just our whole, like you said, modern culture and environment that has really changed so much and created all of this unhealthy stuff. Do you have any solutions for managing conditions such as arthritis, pain, or menstrual cramps for the ladies, headaches? Because we know the potential side effects and the damage that these drugs are doing to the small intestines, how, they might facilitate, that migration there to the upper colon. But could you elaborate? Is there any alternative? Do you know of any alternative pain management, or is it just a matter of taking it out and it itself will heal itself and you won't even need a drug?
One of the really tough concepts I advocate, Joyce, it's really hard for people to understand, is to try to get rid of this idea of treating things, treating depression, treating high blood sugar, treating obesity, treating skin rashes.
Yes.
Instead, let's take a look at it this way. Let's correct the many factors lacking in modern life that allow those diseases to emerge. Whether the label is type 2 diabetes or fibromyalgia or sleep apnea or obesity or hypertension or fentanyl, doesn't matter. They'll go away when you address the causes. Now, that's not always true. There are some people who, for instance, have bone-on-bone arthritis, they're too far gone, and they will need some strategy for pain relief. And that's a whole nother conversation, of course, whether it's CBD, THC, or some intra-articular injection. But know that if you engage in restoring all these loss factors, so a very important loss factor for joint health, so that we've been told, cut your fat and cholesterol. This ridiculous advice that never had any evidence to begin with, any good evidence. Well, it caused modern people to abandon consumption of organ meats.
Mm.
Organ meats like tongue, heart, and stomach and intestines, rich in collagen and hyaluronic acid. And those two are very important for joint health because collagen and hyaluronic acid cause deposition of more collagen in your joint cartilage and increase the synovial lubricating fluid. And it reduces skin wrinkles because it increases dermal collagen and dermal moisture. And by the way, so that mix of microbes I mentioned, Reuteri, Gasseri, and Bacillus coagulans, most people respond over 4 weeks. Some, like people like maybe like you who had a lot of antibiotics, didn't have to do it longer, like several months. But the
Okay.
one you want to keep on doing is the Lactobacillus reuteri,
Okay.
because you're going to see your crow's feet and smile lines going away. You're going to see forehead wrinkles and nasolabial fold receding. Those are deeper and require more collagen. You'll see your skin become moister. You'll see that you're more muscular, like you were when you were 25.
I love it.
Your sleep will be deeper. You'll have more vivid dreams. Your blood sugar and blood pressure will be lower. Your libido will go up. Men's testosterone, older guys will have about a 50% rise in testosterone. As you know, as a woman ages, she's more likely to develop vaginal atrophy and dryness.
Well,
Well, that will recede and you'll regain vaginal moisture and sensation. In other words, a lot of the phenomena of aging start to unwind, start to reverse. And that's specifically the reuteri.
okay.
Uh, so the reuteri gastroi bacillus coagulans is very powerful as a means of eradicating the SIBO and endotoxemia. Once you've done that, you want to continue the reuteri. It doesn't have to be every day, but several times a week. And that's how you maintain and accumulate all those youth restoring effects.
What woman doesn't love that? I know I do. So explain then this yogurt, which is amazing, and you give detailed, explanation how to buy the ingredients, how to make it, how to do a yogurt, all of that, and get started on that. If anybody's like, what is this? It's all in the book. But explain, if you would, the difference for anyone who doesn't know probiotic versus prebiotic, and that the yogurt is actually then, if I'm not mistaken, a prebiotic, right? Like, so we're actually restoring, we're not just feeding the good bugs, but we're actually putting in good bugs with the yogurt. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So those species I mentioned are so-called keystone species.
Okay.
Like plankton in the ocean, the microscopic creatures that filter feeding creatures like whales and jellyfish feed on. Well, if we lost plankton, that's happening, by the way. If we lose plankton, we lose jellyfish and whales. So the creatures at the bottom of the feeding pyramid and those guys I mentioned, reuteri gastroi, are at the bottom. They feed other microbes. So that's a start to restoring the lost microbes. A very important thing for your audience to know but the most important thing you can do, besides eliminating those factors that disrupt your microbiome, like those drugs and chlorinated drinking water, is also make sure you're consuming lots and lots and lots of fermented foods. It could be kimchi, kefir, fermented veggies that you ferment on your kitchen counter. It's very easy. It's inexpensive. Because the curious thing about that, though, Joyce, is the microbes of fermented veggies like sauerkraut.
Yeah.
These are species like Leuconostoc mesenteroides. I'm sorry about these names. Or Pediococcus pentasaceus. These microbes don't
Comes
take
up with these names.
These microbes don't take up residence in your GI tract. You consume them, say, as some sauerkraut. They pass through, you poop them out. So what good are they?
Yeah, so what good are they?
Well, those fermenting species act like farmers and help cultivate the species you're lacking. These are species with very important functions, besides reuteri and gastroi, Fecalibacterium prosnitzii, or Akkermansia muciniphila, or Ruminicacea. Tons of microbes bloom when you consume those fermented foods, even though the microbes in the fermented foods don't take up residence. And when you do this, that's where you get amplification, all those benefits: shrinking waist, restoration of youthful muscle, more energy, clarity of thought, increased energy, reduction of things like depression and anxiety. So fermented foods, a cornerstone of your effort. Adding back those keystone species like Lactobacillus reuteri and gastroi, very important also. And then we add fibers. These are things that nourish, so-called prebiotic fibers.
Yeah.
Or what the Sonnenbergs, the Justin Erica, the husband-wife team at Stanford had relabeled microbiota accessible carbohydrates. And the reason they did that, yeah, I know, because it's not just fibers. There's a whole bunch of things. It's like that hyaluronic acid, Joyce.
Yeah.
So ladies say this to me. Say, oh, don't tell me about hyaluronic acid. I pay a ton of money for a serum I put around my eyes and it reduces wrinkles. Well, that's true. When I asked them, what did it do for the skin on your neck or thighs or abdomen? Nothing, because it's topical and superficial. And you wash it off at night. What if you got it orally? Which you could have done with tongue, heart, or skin, or other organs.
Right.
Most people don't want to do that. They're too squeamish. So we get hyaluronic acid as a supplement. What does that do? Well, it increases dermal collagen. It increases dermal moisture, because hyaluronic acid is very effective at retaining water. And it adds to the lubricating fluid in your joints. and it blooms those beneficial species. Well, think about that. Hyaluronic acid is a fiber, one of the few fibers that comes from animals.
Wow.
Because most fibers come from plants, right?
Right.
Hyaluronic
Yes.
acid comes from animals. And when you take hyaluronic acid, whether it's some chicken skin, some salmon skin, or supplement, you
Yeah.
bloom those butyrate producing species like Faecalibacterium and Akkermansia. And that translates into reduced blood sugar, reduced blood pressure, deeper sleep, better mood, increased muscle, and better skin.
Wow. Could you
Because that
take that in a supplement form if you didn't want to eat the tongue and the organs of an animal? Does that come in a supplemental form that you would say actually has some benefit that you can see a difference? Yeah. Okay.
The hyaluronic acid is widely available as a powder or in capsules, and it's
Okay.
inexpensive. I think I paid $8 for like a
Wow.
3 month supply.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's very
fantastic.
inexpensive. But the
Yeah.
key is consuming it orally. You can still do the serums and spend all that money for that stuff,
Right.
but you're going to get body-wide effects.
Right.
And hyaluronic acid, Joyce, is probably one of the most underappreciated nutrients there are because it also has, so the uterus, cervix, and vagina is
Yeah.
made largely of hyaluronic acid. The
Wow.
brain contains tons, or supposed to contain tons of hyaluronic acid. Your arteries are lined with hyaluronic acid, the so-called glycocalyx that controls arterial tone. Hyaluronic acid. So this thing, absent from the diets of most modern people. So it's another reflection of the perversions we've been through in diet. You cut your saturated fat, eat more healthy. The worst thing you could possibly do.
Right.
Don't eat saturated fat like organ
Right.
meats. Over and over and over again, these mistakes have been made. But Joyce, in some ways, I'm grateful that as a society, we've made these enormous blunders because we wouldn't know a lot of this,
That's
except if
true.
we made these mistakes.
I love your positive outlook on that. You're talking about then fermented food being so important and that we should all be eating that every day. And if I'm being honest, I've like never eaten fermented food in my entire life, 54 years old, maybe a pickle at the deli, way back in the day. And I'm really embracing, okay, I need to. I have this story and mindset similar to, women, because it's a whole mindset shift, right? Of, ew, it's gross. Listening again to your book really put into perspective where we created that story. As you're sharing, the modernization of refrigeration back in 1920, I forgot what you said it was, 27 maybe, something like that, when we came up with a refrigerator. Prior to that, we were fermenting foods. It's how the only way that we could keep something and have something more than maybe a day. And then, wow, the glitzy, there it started, right? Our modern culture, as you're sharing, that having this food. And again, it's so now I'm looking at my refrigerator every time I'm opening it up and it almost feels like, wow, it's almost just like antibacterial soap. It's just one of those things that we're trying, I relate it to that, just it being so neat and clean and pristine, but it's taken away something from us, right? Just like all the antibacterial stuff and our over cleanliness and washing too much, that there's something to that it's almost, it hasn't helped our food in essence, from what I understood, and that we should go back to it. And you mentioned how people do look at fermented food as kind of, ew, that's gross. And I'm not going to lie, I do too. But, I used to think vegetables were, ew, that's gross. When I lived off of candy and hot dogs and, soda and French fries. And it's definitely a mindset shift. And so the same course that I got to mindset to shift myself to get off of sugar and change that, I'm finding I have to do that same thing, rewrite the story, see that I've been telling myself a lie about these healthier foods and to go back to that, because that really, there's more for me, more coming home that I need to do, that ladies need to do, that we haven't gone back to our roots of really how we were meant to live in order, which is why we're so far removed from our health, and why our health is just deteriorated so much. So yeah, I could really relate to the fermentation. And I remember, as I think I've shared with you in our previous conversations, I'm plant-based vegetarian, but I do remember, I was raised on meat until my family, we all moved away from it in my 20s. But my grandparents, when they had, beef and an animal in the house that they bought, they were like pulling out the tongue, they were pulling out the organs, they were cooking that up. My mom, was serving me liver. I was putting it under the table and feeding it to the dog. But and now that's just not even, my son probably doesn't even know what liver is or think like someone eats that. So again, just that so far removed. Yeah, it's
No, it's important for your listeners not be scared by the idea of
yeah,
fermentation. It's very, very easy. One easy way to start, for instance, Joyce, is
yeah.
there's an increasingly available commercially fermented foods like sauerkraut or fermented pickles. And
Okay.
so let's say you buy a jar of fermented, like Bubby's is a very popular brand. It's very expensive. It's like $10 for a jar
Wow.
of
Okay.
pickles. If you do buy pickles, make sure it says live cultures or fermented. So
Okay.
most pickles are just brine, salt water, and vinegar. You want one that's been fermented. Well, eat the pickles, enjoy them, save the liquid. You can drink some of the liquid, but
Okay.
chop up some mini cucumbers, make sure they're organic and not coated in wax. Chop
Okay.
up some mini cucumbers, put it in that jar with the remaining fluid, make sure you fill it to the top, cap it, sit on your counter for a week, and you have a new batch of pickles that cost you whatever you paid for those little mini cucumbers. So
Okay.
you can do these little tricks. A lot of those tricks, by the way, some of them are in the Super Gut book. Some of the more recent tricks are in my blog, the Dr. Davis, very awkwardly named, I'm sorry, drdavisinfinitehealth.com blog. Like, for instance, what I came up with just last week is to make a sparkling juice. I fermented black cherry juice
Wow.
with a microbe called Bacillus subtilis, which has some fairly spectacular effects. It increases, like Reuteri, increases muscle, reduces abdominal fat. Um, it may provide vitamin K2, it may be a cheap way to get vitamin K2. And you know what? It makes a delicious black cherry soda
Ah, that sounds
with
wonderful.
almost no sugar. Because the great thing about these microbes is they take the sugar and metabolize it out. So
Oh,
you want it minimally sweet, and you have now black cherry soda, providing this incredibly potent microbe. There's all kinds of recipes like that. So people get all turned off. It's gonna be gross and slimy. No, 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 no. It can be a
right.
lot of fun.
Okay. I love it. I love it. I'm definitely going to check that out. Before we move into how people can find you, I want to talk briefly because it's not often that I get a doctor at your caliber here for my ladies, because I get a lot of ladies coming in on the hot topic. So we're getting a little bit off of super gut right now. Massive rise of the GLP-1 agonists, drugs like Ozempic. And what are you seeing? I'd love to hear your perspective on what the problem is with these drugs and why really they're not working specifically long term. I mean, I have women come to me, they lost 100 pounds, but they go off of it and now their cravings are back and they're back to square one and the weight's starting to go up. So you tell me, I'm going to shut up here.
Joyce, what's shocking about all this is the science is actually quite well sorted out already. So things we know. If you reduce calories by any means, whether it's reducing calories, move more, eat less, all that
Right.
stuff, or some point counting program, or an app, or a GLP-1 agonist like Wegovy, Ozempic, and Mounjaro that make you indifferent to food and reduce your calorie intake, or even a bariatric procedure like lap band or gastric bypass that reduces stomach volume. They're all variations of the same theme, reducing calorie intake. And we know with good evidence, when you reduce calorie intake, you do lose weight. But of the weight lost, 25% is muscle.
Mm,
And when you lose muscle, your metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories, drops. So, for instance, remember the Biggest Loser TV show?
yeah.
So, Danny Cahill, for instance, won season 8. He started at 430 pounds. He lost 239 pounds, which is incredible. In
Wow.
210 days, he was taking in 800 calories per day
Oh,
and burning something like
cardio.
8,000. So a testimony of this guy's toughness, he could do that. He
Right.
left the show, he regained 200 pounds. And
Wow.
he kept track of other, they had these occasional reunions. And he said
Mhm.
he'd see all these people coming back with all the weight regained. Well, he was among the people studied by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, a bunch of graduates from season 8. And they found that their basal metabolic rate, the rate at which they burn calories, had dropped dramatically. essentially permanently.
Wow.
And they were guaranteed to regain the weight. And even worse, Joyce, another study showed that these people also had distortions of appetite hormones, such that even after regaining the fat weight, they were hungrier than they were at the start. So you're doomed. If you cut calories, you're doomed. And we
Yeah.
know that. There's a recent study from the UK. People put on the semaglutide, the like the Wegovy. They lose weight. They stop the drug because most people can't afford to take it forever.
Right.
They regain nearly all as fat. They don't regain the muscle. They regain all fat. And actually, the amount of people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes,
Yeah.
risk for coronary disease, dementia, breast cancer was higher at the end than it was at the start. So people paid big pharma tens of thousands of dollars to become less healthy. So I did a recent clinical trial where it was for skin because ladies say to me, we don't care about muscle. We don't care
I
about love and
do.
empathy. We just want better skin. So I said, okay, fine. So we did a small skin trial, 25 ladies. I said, don't change your diet. Don't change your exercise program. Just get, in this case, it was Lactobacillus reuteri.
Okay.
And I stacked the odds in favor of better skin changes by throwing in marine sourced collagen peptides, hyaluronic acid, and the carotenoid, astaxanthin. That's because most modern diets are lacking carotenoids like beta carotene. So I chose the most potent one, astaxanthin. So I said to the ladies, please take this. That's what, 90 days. We measured the thickness of their dermis using what's called high resolution skin ultrasound, and there was a dramatic increase in dermal thickness. They were happy because they lost their crow's feet and their fine wrinkles. But we also measured their waist circumference. It was a skin trial, Joyce, so we didn't do a lot of measurements. We measured their waist. And to my great surprise, they lost a huge amount of abdominal fat. And even more remarkably, on this skin trial, even more
Wow.
remarkably, despite losing huge amounts of abdominal fat, they didn't lose weight. Well,
Wow.
consistent with the previous evidence, they're gaining muscle. And
Right.
so what we're seeing is people say, well, my shoulders are firmer, my thighs are firmer, my buttocks are firmer, my face looks younger, no wrinkles, more musculature like when you were 25,
Right.
unlike Ozempic face, right, where you lose
Yeah.
subcutaneous fat and muscle and
Yeah.
look 10 years older. So we're seeing the opposite. I need to do more work in that to quantify better and understand better. But I think we have a way. So I tell people, let's quit thinking about losing weight.
Yes.
Think instead about building better body composition. Let's lose specifically abdominal fat. The other fat will follow. It's fat in your thighs and buttocks. That will follow.
Right.
Let's first target the most problematic form of fat, abdominal fat. Let's not let you lose muscle. In fact, let's restore muscle you lost since age 25. And that gives you control over your metabolic rate, control over not regaining weight, and
Right.
also gives you long-term health,
Yes.
protection from frailty and falls and fractures and better metabolic health. So I think in this case, once again, Joyce, I stumbled into
Into it.
a solution.
Yeah, it's so key. I mean, again, like what I'm, seeing with women who are on these drugs and then going off of it is they're telling me that their appetite, they're in love with it because their appetite just disappeared. But if I'm not mistaken, the science behind that, and again, this is so elementary how I'm explaining it to you, is that it is affecting like the hormones and basically like the gut microbiome, signaling the brain that you're not hungry. So you're just not eating, you're eating less. And they're still eating the same crap diet that they were eating before. Instead of a whole bagel or a whole cupcake, they're eating half because then they're full. So then when they go off of it, those cravings are just going to go back. They're just going to come right back because they haven't gotten to the root of the problem. And if I understand correctly, if we heal our gut microbiome, if we go and start making these yogurts, start eating the fermented foods, stop the antibiotics, I mean, the whole big long list, that we talk about, but not overwhelming, one step at a time. It can be done. It's a process that, when you heal that, you won't have those cravings. Like you won't have, your ghrelin and your leptin off. You'll have, it won't be affecting your brain because those cravings are real. But, and then, use that time when you don't have those cravings to also learn how to eat real whole food. Because what, like for me, my cravings aren't here anymore because I don't have these chemical food like products in my system triggering, it's like I'm not on a drug, right? That's creating, this addiction. So it's out of sight, out of mind. Like I don't crave it. I don't need it. Physically, it's not happening for me. So it allows me then to make these sound choices of eating real whole food that then in turn would heal us. And I'm also a huge proponent and advocate for muscle. I love lifting weights. I think it's so important for our metabolic health. And I tell women this all the time. They've never been in the gym or they're eating maybe 30 grams of protein a day. Again, they need to bring awareness to how much protein. They're a little scared by what I suggest. I'd love to hear if you have a certain number. I mean, I recommend, at least, for me, I do about 1 gram per body weight, for my ideal body weight. I'm consuming on average about 120 grams easy a day of protein. And I have no problem between lifting and eating protein, being able to build muscle and lose fat. In particular, my visceral fat. it's 3. Like I've got like nothing on my abdomen, and it's because of the food choices, for sure. And someone may be starting off that might seem like, wow, that's a lot of protein for them. And I also say it's really not. And I've got it hard because I'm plant-based. I still do eat eggs and egg whites and whole eggs, and I still have some hard cheeses. So all of that adds up. But I do supplement with a fermented, believe it or not. I didn't realize the connection there. I just loved the taste and the profile of fermented vegan protein powder, plant-based, that works phenomenal for me. And it's easy to get 120 plus grams of protein. You're advocating, I'm assuming, more protein also, like that do you feel that that's important for health, for metabolic health, to consume the protein?
Yeah, I kind of take a little different approach. So what I do, for one, we never limit fat.
Okay.
So if you want more butter, go ahead. If you're
Yep.
going to have a pork chop, make sure you eat the fat.
Yep.
Don't
Agreed.
buy lean cuts. Don't get lean ground meat. Get full fat ground meat.
Yep.
Pour off the oil. Use more olive oil. So we don't restrict fat and calories. And that, by the way, is very satiating. And of
Yes.
course, we eliminate gliadin-derived opioid peptides. That removes that appetite stimulant. And also, Reuteri via oxytocin also suppresses appetite specifically for snacking. So
Love
with
it.
this style of eating, hunger is not something you have to deal with anymore. So you have, let's just say 2 eggs, some sausages, and maybe some fermented food at 7 a.m. You might be hungry by 3 or 4 p.m.
Right.
So as opposed to the people who follow dietary guidelines, they have their bowl of oatmeal at 7, they're hungry at 8:30, they have a snack, they're hungry at 10, they have another snack, they're counting minutes till lunch, they have their lunch, they're hungry at 1:30. That's what modern people do.
Yeah.
So is very different. But because we don't have that appetite, that driving appetite anymore, what I find is I tell people, eat when you're hungry.
Right.
And
Yes.
they typically get more than enough protein, more than enough fat. We do count carbohydrates, net carbs, only because many people start with insulin resistance and you'll
Mm.
get rid of it faster if you do limit carb exposure because you're not provoking blood glucose and insulin. That's
Right.
the only thing. And we never limit calories, never limit calories. You might do it for a day, maybe, or you do some
Right.
time restricted eating, that kind of stuff. That's okay. But prolong more than a few weeks of cutting calories, you've lit the fuse of a bomb that's going to go off. And you'll be like those Biggest Loser contestants.
Right. Would you consider vegetables? I know they're a carbohydrate, but would you be counting those? Because I personally don't count I'm aware of it, but again, that's good. And it's all that fiber and it's like, it's helping my gut, right? It's feeding the good bugs, to go off of that. So I don't stress about the carbs per se coming from broccoli or a spinach salad or something. Do you count that or tell, people, in your community to watch the carbs? And do you give them a specific number if they're working on reducing their insulin?
You're right. Things like spinach or kale or broccoli have essentially zero net
Yeah, it's
carbs.
so
So
small.
yeah, I do advocate. I have to point out, Joyce, that I come from the world of people dying of heart disease.
Right.
Heart disease is serious business, right? You can die suddenly. You can die en route to the hospital before anybody gets to you with a angioplasty or something. So, and anytime you exceed 15 grams net carbs,
Yeah.
that's total carbs minus fiber, you provoke formation of small LDL particles.
Wow. Okay. That's a good
And
number to know.
those, because so the small LDL particle has a different surface conformation, different shape, and the recognition protein, it's called apoprotein B, on that particle is not recognized by the liver. So if you eat bacon fat, say, and you get a large LDL particle, liver says, I recognize that, and it clears it very, very quickly. If you ate, let's say, a slice of pizza or a bagel or a bowl of cereal, you provoke formation of small LDL. Liver does not understand what that is, and it goes around and around in your circulation, giving it about a week to infiltrate your arteries, stimulate inflammation and other factors. So small LDL is far worse than large LDL, and it takes one exposure per week, Joyce, to have a flood of small LDL particles. So
That's scary.
because I come from that world, it's a very sobering thing to see. So I'd have somebody, for instance, in the office, and they survived a heart attack, say, big heart attack. And
Okay.
they opened the arteries, they limited the damage to only 40% of their heart, right? But I do their lipoproteins, and they're vitamin D deficient. They're not taking fish oil. They're eating, so we make them go wheat and grain free. Small LDL drops from, say, 2,400 to, let's say, 900.
Okay.
Much better, still kind of lousy, and still with lots of risk. I say, come on, John, are you really doing the diet? I am. Are you sure? Well, every Friday is my bad day, and I allow myself one slice of pizza. Joyce, that's all it takes. And so because I came from that world, it drove home to me, it's not a small issue, it's a big issue. That the amylopectin A of wheat and grains, as well as sucrose, fructose, glucose, all
Yeah.
provoke formation of small LDL particles.
Wow. That's fascinating. That's really good to hear. To hit, it hits home. Just one slice a week can really change that. And I hope that my listeners are getting that. I hope I'm getting that too. I am getting that. I mean, as you speak, I just keep coming up with a million more questions, but I gave an allotted amount of questions and I did exceed my time. So I need to be cognizant of your time here. So before we wrap things up, I mean, this has been such an awesome conversation with you. Would you share with our listeners just how they can connect with you? How they can be a part of your community, because you've got a huge super gut, wheat belly community. Let them know. And I will put all the links also in the show notes as well.
Sure, Joyce. So, of course, the Super Gut book, if anyone is interested in the rationale behind this wheat issue, that's, of course, in the Wheat Belly books, like the revised and expanded edition that came out in 2015, I think. And if you want some of the more modern, newer thinking, it'll be in my awkwardly named blog, which is drdavisinfinitehealth.com. Several thousand articles, several 100,000 discussion forum posts. And we do a two-way Zoom like this, typically once a week. And we talk about all the things, emerging ideas. And so we talked about Reuteri, Gasteri, Bacillus coagulans, and the fermented food microbes. But you know what, Joyce? There's a whole range of important microbes you can play with, and it's fun. For instance, there's a microbe called Lactobacillus crispatus. It's the dominant microbe in the human vaginal tract. And about a third of the female population of the world has lost it. And that increases your risk for miscarriages, premature delivery of a child, which can be catastrophic, right? Greater susceptibility to Candida infections and E. coli vaginitis, and bladder infections and urge incontinence, coughing, sneezing, laughing, and peeing. Will restore crispatus, and a lot of my ladies, my aunts, well, they'll buy the product. The only commercial source I know of is a product called Jarrow Femdophilus Advanced. I don't make this stuff up. So Jarrow Femdophilus Advanced, it has that microbe, the strain of microbe we want, Lactobacillus crispatus. Make a yogurt. You know what, Joyce? It's the most delicious yogurt you ever had. It tastes like sweet cream cheese
I love that.
from a vaginal microbe.
That is fantastic. And these are all the things, different subjects and topics that you discuss if someone can join your community. I know you've got
Mhm.
that on your main website. I'll put that link also for a very minimal amount and be a part of that and have these face to face with you as well. That's fantastic. Dr. Davis, I want to thank you again for joining me today. You know, your work is just, it's so important. We need more doctors like you out there, but you are a rare breed. And I'm so thankful for your support and from all of us here at iKid Sugar, just for taking the time out of, I know you got a real busy schedule to be a part of, you know, this today and to just impart some of your wisdom on all of us. So thank you again so much.
Thank you, Joyce, and please continue doing what you're doing because you're sharing a very important message also that many more millions of people need to hear.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You
Take
too.
care.
Thank you, Joyce.